welcome to No Offseason presented by Mass Mutual. I'm Zena
And I'm Sabreena Merchant.
And today is a special day, folks, because we are here. We are putting our dancing shoes on. March Madness is upon us. Sabreena, can you believe it?
I'm so excited. Today was so much fun, Zena. I mean, too many basketball things going on. First of all, I want to just issue a little stop it to the WNBA for issuing trade news on today of all days, Selection Sunday. But
literally
focus on college basketball.
We will round out to the Natasha Cloud New York Liberty trade on another episode tonight. Tonight is about the NCAA. And yeah, the fact that the NBA, unrivaled, the WNBA wanted to get in on the action. And then, of course, Selection Sunday for women's basketball was just insane. But we're happy. We're excited. We've got a lot to get into today. The bracket just dropped like a couple of hours ago. I know you guys are hearing this on Monday, but we are recording in the late hours. Okay, this is why we've got our skincare on. We look good. All right, we are literally about to go to sleep very soon after this. But before that, we're going to break this all down. The seedings, the snubs, the shape of it all. And then after Sabreena and I talk, Chantel Jennings is going to join, and she's going to give us her take on all the best picks, get a full bracket breakdown from Chantel, and then we'll get some early thoughts from Sabreena on what to watch for in terms of surprises, Cinderella picks, you know we love those, and that kind of thing. So you may have noticed, new name, fresh sound. We've been warning you. If you haven't been paying attention, we've been warning you. But yes, definitely excited because the Athletic Women's Basketball Show is now officially No Offseason. Because that's what women's basketball does. Year round, baby. That's how we roll. Okay. So if you're already subscribed, we got you covered. If you're new here, hit the follow button. You can stay up to date with us. Also, we've got a lot of good stuff coming up. Check out our brand new YouTube channel. You'll be seeing our mugs way often. So Sabreena, we're going to have to be super moisturized for all of our shows now. Cause we're going to keep sharing videos, including full episodes of No Offseason. Okay, we're done with all that. Let's get into the big dance. Sabreena, the bracket has arrived, and we finally got our number one seeds. UCLA, USC being the Southern California, USC, South Carolina, and Texas. What are your thoughts on those?
It's exactly what I predicted. I thought that UCLA was going to be the number one overall seed. Despite what other prognosticators may have said, I think it was pretty clear that the Bruins deserved it, having lost to one team all season.
Sure.
And then the other three number one seeds all made sense to me just based on the collection of their high profile wins, not too many bad losses, and their strength of schedule, which I think is what demoted UConn to a number two seed compared to the rest of them, even though UConn had defeated South Carolina by some convincing margin earlier in the year.
See, I took actually notes because I'm a nerd during the Selection Sunday episode. And, you know, of course, thoughts about the UConn potential snub, et cetera, was interesting. I also thought, you know, the Notre Dame decision not to put them in a number two seed. Of course, I don't think they were deserving of a number one seed, especially after the way everyone kind of laid out the rest of the season, but also the actual core of their seasons between UCLA, USC, South Carolina, and Texas. But I thought that they did a great job of explaining why UConn and Notre Dame, you know, fell in their standings overall. But we also got to talk about the obvious topic on the other end of the scale. Not the snubs at the top, but the bubble snubs. So this isn't something that the NCAA like bracket committee comes out and says, selection committee comes out and says, this is who was stubbed. But we know who didn't make it. So Sabreena, share with us. Who was snubbed?
You can kind of read into who the snubs were based on who the number one seeds are in the NIT, which is, you know, the tournament of the teams that did not make the NCAA tournament. And the number one seeds there are Virginia Tech, Colorado, James Madison, and St. Joseph's. And Virginia Tech is actually the one team that the chairperson of the NCAA selection committee said was the first team out. So, you know, we've been talking about all of the potential mid-majors who had a chance to make this tournament, like the 3-bit Ivy, which did actually end up happening. And I'm sure we'll get to that. But Virginia Tech to me is the most obvious casualty, so to speak, of that 3-bit Ivy, because, you know, the committee said that their losses at the end of the season prevented them from getting in, as opposed to Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia, or I should say Princeton and Columbia, because Harvard got the automatic bid out of the Ivy League.
Right. after winning a great performance in the conference tournament. I am wearing a Yale sweatshirt to represent for the Ivy League, although Yale was...
I'm wearing a Duke shirt and Duke sweats. Okay.
Look at you.
We got a double selection Sunday going on here.
Wow. I mean, obviously Duke is one of those teams that we're going to get into this could be a surprising kind of contender, especially the way that they closed the season. And I think that was like one of the things that I thought was really interesting when the president of the selection committee was talking about, I'm going to bring up Notre Dame, but specifically about this term she called the interaction effect, because I'm wondering if this also applied to Virginia Tech, with some of the losses that they had towards the end of the season, but then also how the teams that they didn't beat, or also teams that they hadn't beat over the course of the year had performed against others. Like, one, can you explain more about that interaction effect and like what that means? And then also, do you think some of these teams that were snubbed in the bubble had that also applied to them?
Yeah, so I think what Sarita Dawkins meant about the interaction effect was it wasn't just the performance of one team. It was the other teams around them that elevated their case, at the expense of the other team. So in the case of Notre Dame, which fell to a 3 seed, it wasn't so much that they lost, 3 of their last 5 games. It was also that TCU goes on to win the Big 12 tournament and Duke goes on to win the ACC tournament. And, NC State picks up another big win in the semifinals against North Carolina of the ACC tournament, right? So it's all of these other things that are happening in combination with Notre Dame going on this little bit of a free fall at the end of the season. With the bubble, I think a similar thing happened because you look at Virginia Tech and they lost 4 out of their last 6 games, including game to Boston College, which is not in the tournament field, and Stanford, which is not in the tournament field, where you look at Princeton and Columbia, both winning games towards the end of their year, the Ivy League season, and Columbia, getting to the final of that Ivy League tournament. So I'm honestly a little confused, though, because if we're relying on recency bias when you're talking about Virginia Tech, because like I look at Virginia Tech and I look at a team that beat Cal during the regular season, that beat Louisville during the regular season, that beat Georgia Tech. Those are 3 wins against NCAA tournament teams. And I look at Princeton and Columbia's resumes and they do not have that many wins against other NCAA tournament teams. So to rely on the recency for, the end of the field, but then you look at, let's say UConn, which ended the season on an absolute heater, right? Including that 29-point win over South Carolina in February, but they get, below some of the other 1 seeds. That lack of consistency is a little confusing to me.
See, okay, so I'm happy you explained the interaction effect, because I was interpreting it as whoever you've beaten or whoever you lost to, how did they do? As opposed to who else is in the conversation with you for the position you could be in, and how did they perform? And so I thought, I'm looking at Virginia Tech and I'm looking at that Cal win, I'm looking at the Louisville win, and I'm looking at, they're in the competition, they're in the tournament. And so this should help your case. But no, that makes sense when it comes to like your peers in that category. How do they perform? I also took a note about, the South Carolina aspect, because they said, the selection committee said that, they were looking at competitive in losses, being like, how competitive were you in your losses, AKA your margin of loss. And the 29-point to UConn, like the 29-point loss to UConn is what caused SC to not get the number 1 overall seed over UCLA, but to still get a number 1 seed overall. And I'm like, I know UConn is like, what the hell? How really you use that to basically not give South Carolina the number 1 overall, but it doesn't help us in getting a number 1 period. Like, what? I couldn't make sense of that.
Yeah, I think there's no one way to make all of the decisions, right?
Sure,
like some of it is, you look at the teams that got the number 1 seeds, strength of schedule to me seems like the obvious differentiator between those 4 teams and UConn. Like they played in the Big Ten and the SEC, competitive games on a night-to-night basis, where UConn is kind of, gets to warm up for those games against Tennessee and South Carolina.
Competitive.
It's not that competitive.
No.
Right? It is not a Power 4 conference. Let's call a spade, right? So like that is like the obvious differentiating factor there. But then you think about Virginia Tech versus the Ivy League, and I would argue that the ACC is a much tougher conference than the Ivy League. And for Virginia Tech to pick up, 9 wins in the ACC and 18 wins overall should be regarded more highly than what those 3 Ivy League teams are able to do one another. And like I struggle with saying that like, oh, Princeton got all of these NCAA tournament wins because they beat Harvard twice. But it's like, I don't know, like if we're all just beating up on each other, like, is it the same thing?
Right. And that's the truth. Like about, the fact that Harvard was ranked throughout the year helped these Ivy Leagues. Right. Because when else would they would have had the opportunity to beat a top 100 net ranking team as consistently as, Columbia or Princeton. So I'm sure there's a lot of teams out there right now that are looking at this selection committee like you're the ops, like you're the ops, because you looked at my schedule and you did not appreciate these wins or these particular, setups. But outside of Virginia Tech, when you look at the people that are on the bubble that were now at the top of the NIT, anyone else stand out for you? James Madison?
I mean, you feel guilty for James Madison because they did so well during the regular season, then lost during the conference tournament, which denies them the automatic bid. And like, that's like the thing with automatic qualifying week, right? Like if you're in a conference where like the Sun Belt, where you're not going to pick up a lot of quality wins over the course of the regular season, you got to do something to distinguish yourself during non-con. And unfortunately, James Madison was unable to do that, right? Like they played Texas, NC State, weren't exactly competitive in either of those games. They don't have a win against any NCAA tournament team this year. So like, I get it. Like it sucks for James Madison. What a run for the Arkansas State Red Wolves. So like first NCAA tournament bid. So cool. I had such a fun time watching that Sun Belt game. But I mean, that's, I think what gives so much meaning to this week, right? Before we get into the NCAA tournament, because so many of these teams, let's face it, they're not really competing for a national championship, right? They're competing for a chance to get into the tournament. And that's what makes that week matter, right? That's what you have to play for. And I think, there's a lot of pros and cons about the system, but I like that it, gives us this excitement all the way through March, right? It doesn't just start on March 21st. All through March, we're playing meaningful games. And I think that's what the selection committee was, trying to show. Yeah,
there's true validity to March Madness, and it is not when the tournament starts, or the NCAA tournament. It is absolutely when those conference tournaments start, because the amount of close games, in the NBA, it's called clutch games. I don't know, do NCAA games call them clutch games too?
It's not a stat by the committee.
It's not yeah, right. I'm like, but anyways, a clutch game, last 5 minutes, last 2 minutes, games just being decided in that very similar crunch time. I was curious about what your thoughts were about USC, UCLA, Texas, South Carolina. Holly Rowe on the Selection Sunday show asked the president of the selection committee about some people wanting differentiation. Right? These teams have all played against each other throughout the year several times. And the question of like, is this going to be competitive? We get to see them play again. And I love the fact that, she came back and said, yeah, this is going to be great competition. There's also 6 new teams in the tournament this year. So there's going to be competition all up and down. We've seen the parity all this season, but what'd you make of like, these 4 teams being at the top and knowing the stats? I wrote this down too. The top 3 seeds are 359-1 in the round of 64. The only loss, 359-1. The only loss was when Harvard beat Stanford in 1998. So Harvard's
Allison
doing something.
Feaster.
Allison Feaster. That's right. Sarah Strong's mother, for those of you that don't know of UConn, Allison Feaster and Harvard. The number 1 seed has won 11 of the last 12 NCAA tournaments. And the top 3 seeds, one of them, have won all 42 titles in the history of this tournament. So you're looking at these top 4 number 1 seeds. And of course, that includes the 2s and the 3s, but you're looking at these 4 that have already played each other and have an opportunity to scout against each other and know each other pretty well. Is it going to still be competitive to you?
Well, just real quick before we get to that, you said 11 of the last 12 have been number 1 seeds, right? You know who the missing one is, right?
Oh, yes. Number 1 seeds have been 11 of the last 12. South Carolina?
No, it was LSU when Angel Reese.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Ringed herself, right?
Oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I was thinking it was when. No. You're absolutely right, because South Carolina went on to win against Indiana. They were okay, never mind. I'm thinking all wrong. Yes, LSU. That's crazy. Huh. Okay.
A number 3 seed again this year, for anyone who's wondering. But it's a good number for LSU. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, so back to your question about if the regionals go hold to chalk, we will get USC versus UCLA for the 4th time in the Final Four. And we will get Texas versus South Carolina for the 4th time in the Final Four.
Wow.
And I don't know about you, 4 is too many to me. I don't need that many games between the same two teams. Right. And I think about Dawn Staley saying that she felt disrespected, that they were not the number 1 overall seed. And Lindsay Gottlieb saying she felt disrespected that they were the 4th number 1 seed. And if we just tweaked a little, maybe matched up the SCs with one another and UCLA and Texas on the other side, could have avoided all that.
That's a good
I understand.
Point.
Yeah,
really
I don't
point.
love teams playing each other for 4 times. I really hope that doesn't happen. I understand number 1s are most likely to make it to the Final Four. I think there are a couple paths that are easier than the others. We'll get to that. But to me, I would have put the Trojans ahead of the Longhorns. So you have USC as the 3rd number 1 and then Texas as the 4th. Just because of the way Texas lost in that SEC title game, I think should have put the Trojans ahead of them.
Yeah.
And then, but I understand. I think the logic of putting USC 4th is fine. It just leads to this outcome that I'm really not a fan of. And I know that the point of the bracket is not to look ahead that far, but I do think that there are some matchups we should try to avoid. And this scenario is one of them.
Well, it is actually hilarious how that simple tweak could have fixed a lot of these issues. And I think it was a really fair question by Holly Rowe, because I think a lot of us were thinking it. But now that actually leads me to perfectly into when you're looking at these different brackets. Of course, we're looking at Spokane 1, then going over Birmingham 2, going down to Birmingham 3, and then over to Spokane 4. Which one do you think is the death bracket or the bracket of death? Are you seeing any sections or regions that are super competitive? And I'm going to just cough to the brands that you're wearing right now on your sweatshirt and sweatpants. That's where I'm leaning, but I want to know what your thoughts are in terms of death brackets.
Yeah, I mean, Birmingham 2 sticks out to me a little bit. Mostly because, again, I don't love Duke and UNC playing each other in the Sweet 16. That is too early. It's too early for teams that have played each other this many times during the regular season.
Right.
I understand mega conferences put us in this impossible situation where teams have to face each other earlier than expected. But I think only 8 ACC teams made it. So you could wait till the Elite 8 for any of them to face each other. Personal opinion, I realize it was not, accepted in this particular instance. But yeah, Birmingham 2 is interesting. I mentioned this on the live blog, but Duke had that ACC tournament run where they avenged all of their ACC losses, right?
Which is so rare for to be like, you thought you knew us. We're coming
they
back
avenged all those losses. Earlier, like their second to last game of the regular season, they beat North Carolina, which avenged an earlier loss to them, right? So 4 of their last 5 games were basically get back games. Yeah. Who's one team Duke lost to again during the regular season? South Carolina. So you got to believe that Carol Lawson has a better idea for how to play the Gamecocks this time around if they can get to the Elite 8, which again, getting past North Carolina, no small feat. Right. So that's a matchup I really like. Birmingham 3 is really interesting to me. Kudos to the committee for once again putting us on a Haley Van Lith versus Louisville collision course. If Louisville can get there this time.
Right.
Louisville
I'm looking
lost to Middle Tennessee last year, so they didn't get to play LSU, but Louisville's a 7 this year, and TCU is a 2, so they could play in the second round if both teams were to win their first round games, which admittedly I feel like we should all be rooting for because that'd be a lot of fun. But I really think like the bracket to look out for is Spokane 4, because that's where you have UConn and USC, who I think if you would put them in separate brackets, I would have picked both of them to make the Final Four, regardless of who else was in their regions. Regardless of who was in their regions, I would have put both of them to be in the Final Four, and they just both can't because they have to play each other to get there. So that sticks out the most. I think, I mentioned my love for Staley Hurd and Oklahoma State earlier. I really like that team. Playing UConn in the second round is going to suck for them, but good luck. Kentucky, Kansas State.
I was just going to say Kentucky. I'm like, as you're speaking, Sabreena, I'm literally looking down this list and I'm like, whoa, Oklahoma, Kentucky. Like, I might take it back. I thought I was looking at Birmingham 2, but I think Spokane 4 is
the one.
That's a tough one. Especially even Iowa, that kind of was heating up towards in their tournament as well.
The only other team to beat USC this year other than UCLA, that's Iowa.
And Cal, what am I doing? Yeah.
And it's like a relatively local game for Cal too, right? Like you can bring people down to Southern California, pack the Galen Center a little bit. Yep. It's not that challenging, I think.
And the Cal Bears travel well.
Yeah, there's no bracket that stands out to me like, Albany 2 last year with Iowa, LSU, UCLA, all of that. That was,
that's
bracket of death in and of
minds.
itself.
Yeah.
But of the 4 regions we have here, I think Spokane 4 is the one that sticks out to me the most. Not just because of the top seeds, which I do think are the best top seeds of any of the 4 regions, but that depth is something else, especially because our Chantel Jennings says that Ayoka Lee is practicing this week. So good luck to anyone facing Kansas State.
Ooh, yeah. Originally I was thinking, I was like, Maryland was looking good with Vanderbilt. Also like Duke, UNC, Birmingham 2 seems packed, but I don't think anyone's touching Spokane. Like the fact that Oklahoma you know what? Let me not speculate. I have no idea what's going to happen, but this is going to be tough. Okay. All right. This is good. This is exactly what we need to hear. Last but not least, before we get some thoughts from Chantel, any matchups that you are like darting your eyes directly to and you cannot wait to see?
Well, I feel like I've mentioned a couple, Duke UNC potentially in the Sweet 16. For fans of Duke men's basketball, Duke Lehigh is a 215 in the first round. Hits a little close to home, I got to tell you.
Okay.
Little CJ McCollum vibes coming up there.
I see.
But, I mentioned the, Louisville against TCU potentially in the second round. But if we're just sticking to the first round, I love Harvard versus Michigan State. Michigan State, one of the best offenses in the Big Ten. Harvard, best defense in the Ivy League. Whoever controls the pace of that game, is going to be very challenging because they like to play in very different ways. But I like that stylistic clash quite a bit. I've been tracking Oregon State, America's team, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to North Carolina. That's going to be a toughie. Those are 2 teams that really, really know how to defend. Yep. But if I am the Tar Heels, I am not happy about a team of that caliber when I am the number 3 seed. And, Michigan against whoever wins at 11, right? Like that's a toughie. Michigan ended the season on a really nice note. Their freshmen are playing really well. Silas Swords, I think, is underrated defensively. Like she gave Juju Watkins some fits in that Big Ten tournament game. So yeah, I think, if Michigan can get past that game, like they could probably give Notre Dame a little run for their money, but I'm not even sure they get past the 11.
Well, I'm also going to give Michigan there was a lot of teams that really showed up with their celebration. Maryland was up there. Michigan was also up there. I appreciated their enthusiasm.
Wasn't Michigan in a living room?
Yeah, but they were I think they were in somebody's dorm and they were having a great time. It literally looked like my college dorm, like living room.
Sure.
But no, you're absolutely right. I feel like the Iowa State or Princeton is like a sleeper. In both cases, particularly with Iowa State, it's like freshmen against freshmen or young players against young players. Iowa State doesn't have that many freshmen, but it's just like a
lot of sophomores,
a lot of young youth between those 2 teams. That the only thing that comes to mind is, I don't know how else to say this, but like, F it. Let's just ball out. Like, who knows what will happen, right? And both of those teams. That's going to be good. And of course, I'm happy you brought up the pace of Harvard. Guys, if you need a sense of Harvard's pace, go watch the Harvard-Columbia game from their Ivy League tournament. It was bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket. It was just non-stop scoring. Lots of fun, though, going back and forth. So, this is a lot. Okay. All right. I think it's time to get Chantel's thoughts. Okay, it would not be a Selection Sunday show without some real talk about picks. And while Sabreena and I were just gabbing away at potential picks, Chantel Jennings, who's joining us now, was actually making her picks. She is fresh off of making her own carefully crafted bracket, and we get to pick her brain, and she's here to break it all down with Sabreena and I. So, Chantel, let's just start. You know what? Let's just dive on in. Let's go Final Four. Why not? Let's just go right to the end of the tournament. Who do you have in the Final Four?
So my Final Four is UCLA.
Okay.
South Carolina. Notre Dame. And UConn.
Oh.
Long live the Big East, Chantel.
Well, tell me more.
That was a very, very high note you just hit, Zena. You tell me more.
Yeah, girl. Okay. I mean, this is interesting.
No, I agree. I mean, here's the thing. I agree with you 100%. I make this pick while going, they could lose in the second round. 100%. Like, admittedly, Sabreena will be the first to say I have been too high on the freshman at Michigan for the last few weeks. I'm reading too much into this Big Ten tournament success they had. Was I considering having Michigan upset Notre Dame in the second round? I was, yes. That was
Did
my
Chantel
first
and I
thought.
have a phone call about this before we recorded?
Yep.
But they
And then I
found
went
a way
from-
to get all the way to the Final Four. Explain this to me, please.
Not just the Final Four, the national title game. I went from having them maybe lose in the second round.
Wait, girl. Oh my God, I'm so confused. Go ahead.
I mean, honestly, I think Notre Dame sort of feels like that team to me that their basement might be the lowest of these sort of teams, and their ceiling might be like the separation between those two might be the greatest of any of these like 1s, 2s, and maybe title worthy 3s. I guess I'd probably only put Notre Dame in there if they play as well as they can.
This is fair. I think this
Based
is
on
a
the
fair
Pats.
point, especially considering what we saw out of Notre Dame in November and December.
That 19
game streak after they had the losses to TCU and Utah. Like, we saw a team that was able to bounce back. Now, ma'am, those last few games to close close the regular season, talking about the conference tournament. None of that is imprinting on your mind?
No, all of it is.
Okay.
That is why do I sound confident right now?
Yeah, I mean,
is this like a confident sounding
Girl,
voice?
just
One thing I want to add to the Notre Dame vibes check. Did they have a reaction cam during the selection show? Because I missed them.
Nope.
No, they did not.
No reaction cam, right?
Oh my
There was no
gosh.
reaction cam. We haven't. They might still be in their locker room, in Greensboro. We don't know. We don't know where they are. No, it's just, here's the thing. We've spent all year talking about parity.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I think about these teams that are in this conversation, and I will still include Notre Dame, despite the fact that it almost feels like they have spent the last few weeks trying to convince me to not include them in this conversation.
Right.
Personally. I will still include them against their wishes. And it just sort of feels like, you know, I don't watch men's basketball, but it sounds like on the men's side, it's like a pretty chalky year. There's, 2-3 teams, and it's like, this is who's going to be in the Final Four. I really do feel like it's a free-for-all this year in women's college basketball. Like, I don't think anyone on our staff is going to have the same Final Four. None of us might have the same national title pick. Like, our Elite Eights might look completely different. Like, it does feel like this is a year where there might be some magic to happen. Sure. And I will acknowledge that there would be a significant amount of magic that would need to happen for Notre Dame to get past some of these teams. However, it just sort of feels like if that team that sort of played with that joy, that looseness, that flow, that defensive energy, I think if Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo are knocking down 3-pointers, it sort of, irons over a few of the wrinkles of their interior game. I think maybe this blessing in disguise of having a few more days off from the ACC tournament to sort of, whatever minds, bodies need to be rehabbed,
Reflect.
flush it. If there was that sort of like come to Jesus moment where it was like, if this team is going to do this, it has to be now.
Yeah.
Like 3 starters are leaving. I'm assuming Olivia Miles is leaving. Like, this group has one shot to get over that Sweet 16 hurdle, and it's now. And I think sort of that magic that we saw with Paige Beckers and UConn last year, where it was like, how is this team going to get to the Final Four when they have, barely 4 players that they're all like bandaged together? Right. And they still did. It sort of feels like that could be Notre Dame's narrative this year.
I can see that. And I also think that...
And feel free to play this back when they lose in the second round to Michigan. And you can say, Chantel, what were you thinking? And I'll say, no, I agree with you. No, I had that thought too.
But I agree with you. I think they not only have... I love this visual of their basement and also their ceiling. Because of all the teams that we're talking about that got themselves knocked out of a number 1 seed, Notre Dame is the most capable of regaining what had them in the conversation in the first place, right? It felt as if it was this like weird jolt at the end of the year, but it's not necessarily characteristic of who they are. They didn't lose a player to injury or anything like that. It wasn't as if they had a coaching change or anything like that. If there's anyone that could get this group there in terms of leadership, Niele Ivey, I think Chantel, you and I both talked about her for Coach of the Year, but also the tools in hand with Hannah Hidalgo, Olivia Miles, etc. Question for you. Who do you have them beating in the Elite Eight?
Texas. Who do you have in the Elite Eight on that top side of the bracket?
Oh, excuse me. Sweet 16. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh,
sorry. I was like, not Elite Eight. In the Sweet 16.
I will say, if we're talking about a number one seed that definitely didn't get the easiest path in their first few games, Texas is playing some pretty good 3-point shooting teams. As a team that doesn't shoot a lot of 3-pointers, I don't think the committee did Texas any favors, but that's kind of beside the point. I have Sweet 16. I have Notre Dame exercising some demons against TCU.
Okay. I figured that's what it was, which is going to be an opportunity to get back, right? Sabreena and I talked about some get back games from a Duke perspective. That's going to be a major one from a Notre Dame perspective. You don't even seem that sure about this pick, but I have to ask, is there another pick that you made on your bracket that you are more unsure about than that Notre Dame one?
Oh, certainly not. Okay. And I'm riding them to the finals.
Okay. All the way to the finals. That's crazy.
Yep.
Who do you have matching up against Notre Dame?
UCLA.
Okay.
So I have sort of like what feels like, the number one overall. But again, we've talked about this so many times. Backcourt play, experienced backcourt play in the tournament is such a tool.
Who can handle the pressure.
And when Sony and Olivia and Hannah are at their best, that backcourt is elite.
Okay.
And it's just like, if they can show up for 40 minutes 6 times this season, and it's now. We'll see.
Okay.
It's one of those things that I feel like this is, again, we go back to this idea. How often in the women's tournament has been like chalk in the 4 number 1 seeds, and that's who's going to be in the final 4.
That's pretty much.
And it just genuinely feels like this season, there have been so many teams that were in that conversation that it would be almost silly to pick all 4 number 1s. Like if there's a year not to do it, it's this year.
It'd be a year that would mean that you didn't watch the games. If you did that, you didn't watch these teams across the year. Now, I'm going to tap into the fact that Sabreena, you and Chantel talk all the time. This is y'all's job. Y'all are writing, you're watching all these games, you're checking in with each other on these teams. I'm going to ask you to guess the biggest upset that Chantel chose on her bracket.
Well, I called Sabreena to talk about my bracket.
Oh, did you? Oh, you already told her. So Sabreena, you know.
I mean,
well, I will bring it back to a prediction that Chantel made back in January when she said that Tennessee would make the Elite Eight. Is that still happening, Chantel?
Not with this bracket.
Okay,
not with this bracket.
Okay, I like that.
They're making the Sweet 16, which with Kim Caldwell
they're
in year
not going down to Notre Dame in the Elite Eight. We didn't get that far.
Hey, is it totally out of the picture for Tennessee to beat Texas, though?
I mean, they only lost by 4 to them during the SEC regular season.
2, I
thought
think,
it was
right?
80-76. My bad.
Wow.
I think it was 2. I can check on that really quick, but I thought it was 2 points. Texas, like 3s and 2s, if that's what they're trading, Tennessee gets hot. Again, I think this will sort of be a litmus test for how SEC teams face Tennessee
4.
the second time around.
80-76.
Okay. Okay. 4 points. Still, that,
exactly.
that's 12 seconds of offense sometimes for Tennessee. Like, it's not much, right? So no, there were viable paths, I think. I'm really surprised, honestly, just looking at this bracket overall by the number of sort of rematches and conference teams that are meeting in the Sweet 16. The fact that it's highly, if this stays chalk, we're going to have 2 Final Four games that are the 4th times
Sabreena
that we've seen these games, which,
how do you feel about
there's
that?
a lot of that going on. I don't love it.
I think a lot of people don't love it. And I think that's why the question was posed on the Selection Sunday show by Holly Rowe. Like, don't people want more competition, something different, et cetera? So it makes sense. Okay, so I want to get back into your bracket. And I feel like I was going to ask you your boldest pick. And I feel like we covered that pretty extensively with Notre Dame. And also the team that you're most unsure about. So we cover that too. Now, you just mentioned that Texas really didn't have any favors done for them as the number one overall seed. As you look at the number ones and the number twos, is there anyone that you feel like has a pretty easy path as you charted them down? Like UCLA, you got them to the finals. Did you feel like that was a pretty easy path for them?
Yeah, I do. I feel like there were a few situations that could have been put in the Bruins' path that might have been a bit dicier, I would say. You know, if you know, Kansas State ends up in UCLA's bracket as a 5 instead of Ole Miss as a 5, that's certainly a much different game that we're looking at than, you know, sort of what could happen in the Sweet 16 there for UCLA. Yeah, so I think, you know, the committee's job is to give the least difficult path to the Final Four to the number one overall seed. And I think they certainly did that. Yeah. I think it helps when your number one overall team has sort of like the unicorn, like Lauren Betts, where you have this sort of 6'7" center, and there's only so many teams and players that can match up in a good situation against her and that team. And, you know, USC is one of them. Obviously, we've seen that this season. But yeah, I thought UCLA's path there is pretty good. I think South Carolina's path as well. I don't think there's necessarily a team. While they could have some good games, I think that's a team that those two feel the safest to me in terms of their paths to Tampa.
Now, I want to ask, and I'm curious, I mean, Sabreena, you haven't filled out your bracket yet, but I think everyone's going to have some very different brackets, especially, you know, with the Notre Dame chip that we started off with Chantel. But if you're looking at the overall layout, which conference was best positioned, in your opinion, throughout this entire bracket layout? Like, in terms of all the different regions, I think I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, you know, ACC got themselves into some tough situations. I think the Big Ten definitely got positioned well to get to the Sweet 16. Yeah, I feel like the ACC and the SEC are in some tough lanes to get to Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight. But which ones are for you?
See, I would disagree with that. I mean, I don't think the Big Ten is positioned all that well. I mean, I understand that Maryland and Ohio State both got hosting seeds, but I'm looking at Chantel's bracket and she's got 2 Big Ten teams making the Sweet 16, and you can guess which 2 Big Ten teams those are. So,
okay.
I was going to say, if my math is correct, and Sabreena can double check me on this, I have SEC leading, and then the ACC, you know me, noted for my respect of the ACC, long standing there. And yeah, the Big Ten only has 2.
The Big 12 even has 3 teams in Chantel's bracket.
The Big 12 has 3.
Who are your Big 3? You're 3 in the Big 12 in the Sweet 16.
So this would be another team that we could talk about sort of in a similar ceiling and basement would be Kansas State, I would say. Whether or not Ayoka Lee plays, like this sort of feels like the game to me. And so in terms of the Big 12, we've got Kansas State out of Spokane 4. We've got TCU in Birmingham 3. And Baylor.
Oh.
Spokane 1.
Okay.
I think that Baylor Ole Miss game is kind of a toss-up to me. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I think it could totally go either way. I think either team that gets through loses to UCLA. But I think
we could see a Sweet 16 with half SEC teams, and I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
Like Absolutely. There could be 8 SEC teams, and that wouldn't shock me.
Maybe I'm just thinking about, I feel very confident that Southern California and UCLA are going to get to, you know, their respective positions.
The Final
Four? I mean, I haven't done my bracket yet, so I don't know. But that's why I think I'm a little bit biased right now in terms of seeing the Big Ten. But again, at the time that we're recording this, the bracket just dropped. So we're doing like deep dives right now.
I know. I can't wait to wake up tomorrow morning, look at this bracket and go, what have I
was I
done? And
thinking?
why have I spoken about this publicly?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
What have I done?
I do feel like this year of all the years is a year for reflection and patience when filling out this bracket, because so many of these teams have performed.
The two things that I wasn't able to do tonight while talking about it publicly.
I know. But it's just like the amount of teams that show different faces throughout this course of the season, right? Like there were so many more this year than I think in previous years. And it makes sense as to why the statistics that I read earlier in the show, just like 359-1. That's how the top three seeds have performed throughout this entire tournament. Like that's normal. That's what we expect. This year, I don't know. Like things are going to be a little bit difficult. But okay, with all that said, we appreciate you, Chantel, for immediately giving us your thoughts with no patience around it whatsoever. Of course, you'll have more time to reflect. But right now, I think you need to get to sleep. Sabreena and I will close out the show. Thanks for joining us. Some of the best moments through March Madness are the ones that you can't fully anticipate. The upsets, the Cinderella stories, the stuff you just cannot predict. But that doesn't mean we're not going to try. That's why we're here. Sabreena, you've got a piece up on The Athletic about upset predictions, particularly 5 upsets to watch out for in the very first round. Talk to us. What are you seeing in this bracket? What are you in your tea leaves anticipating as an upset?
Well, just to preface this, admittedly, upsets are a little less common on the women's side. You know, with the hosting format, it's a lot harder to upset a team on their home court than it is on a neutral site. So even if you're a really good 10 seed, when you face a 2 seed on their, home court with all their fans, where they get to sleep in their own beds, it just adds to the level of difficulty. So it's a lot harder to get upsets at this time of the tournament. And frankly, I'm not even sure that I'm that pro upset, because I like the good games at the end. I don't love it when, all the 1s and 2s get knocked out by the second weekend and we're left with the final 4 of like a 7 and 8, a 9 and 11. Like that's a men's problem. That's not a women's problem. I like the good teams to make it through. So just to say that I'm not necessarily sure that these upsets are going to be predictive of teams getting to the Sweet 16 or even further, but in the first round, these are some games that I have my eye on. Now, we already mentioned this earlier, Michigan State and Harvard. I think Harvard just on a good roll here. Harmony Turner might be the best player in this game, although Grace Van Sluten, awesome. How Harvard's going to deal with her. Elena Rodriguez is going to have her hands full. But I like Harvard's defense, and generally when it comes to upsets, if there's a team that's really good defensively versus one that's really good offensively, I tend to pick the one that's really good defensively. So, Crimson, my apologies, Zena, although I know you like Harmony Turner as much as the rest of us. So
I do. Yeah. I really do. And I think it's funny that you said Elena Rodriguez is going to have her hands full, because she typically has her hand full with giving the ball away with all the assists that she gives. I was like, did you do that on purpose? I couldn't tell. But anyways, okay. Yeah, I definitely see that. And I absolutely, when I looked at that matchup, when you mentioned it earlier, I was like, ooh, Harvard may get to what I'm predicting is going to be an NC State game, but we'll see. Okay, that makes sense. What's next?
All right, so next up, if we look at Spokane 4, Florida Gulf Coast versus Oklahoma. This is actually a rematch of a first-round game from last year. It was I want to say it was a 5-12 last year, and this year it is a 3-14. But I still really like Gulf Coast. Just their style of play is they get up shots just as much as Oklahoma does. So the pace really matches what they're trying to do. They only lost by 3 last year. Again, level of difficulty a little bit higher this year because it is in Norman, Oklahoma. But if ever there were a high seed to lose, I like this matchup for.
So I thought
Gulf
you were going to
Coast.
say the level of difficulty is a little bit higher because there's a person in the middle. That's Reagan Beers is a little bit.
Hey, I think about 3 years ago when Gulf Coast upset Virginia Tech when Liz Kitley was in the middle. Liz Kitley set like a program record with 40-some points in that game. It did not matter.
Fair.
So I think the style works in favor of Eagles here.
May want to see a little bit more Florida Gulf Coast before that style may change next year, especially with, head coach heading over to Atlanta. Next up, what's the next upset on your list?
All right, so if we look at Birmingham 2, Maryland versus Norfolk State. I was not super thrilled with the way Maryland ended their regular season, getting curb stomped basically by Michigan in the Big Ten tournament.
Is crazy.
Dealing with that injury to Bree McDaniel. Cheyenne Sellers came back, but I don't think she's quite been herself since coming back. In Norfolk State, they've got Diamond Johnson, who has been in this stage before. She played in tournaments with NC State. That is as good of a player as you're going to find on a mid-major team. So, it's another upset formula, right? Like, you want to make sure you have the best player on the court. And I'm not sure if Diamond Johnson is the best player in that matchup, but she could be for a game. And that's just enough. Again, the kind of player who is not fazed by these environments. So, another one to keep an eye on.
I really love the Ivy League and the HBCUs showing up in this tournament. Like, I really do want Norfolk State to just get a little ahead, because I think that there's literally never any HBCU representation. And this is a team that I absolutely think could take it to the next level in terms of at least to the next round past the 64. So, okay, I like this. Keep it going. What's number 4?
All right. So we mentioned this again earlier, but it was Michigan versus the winner of Iowa State Princeton.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I think I like the upset potential better if it's Iowa State, just because Audie Crooks is something of a matchup nightmare. Michigan doesn't have a really true post to contend with her. And, we saw this last year in the tournament where Audie puts up 40 points in the first round against Maryland because they really just didn't have a legitimate center to guard her. And for all of Iowa State's difficulties this year, Audie has not been the problem. So I think if the Cyclones get past Princeton, that's an 11-6 that I think works in their favor against
this
Michigan.
As well. I'm trying to figure out if I want to root for Princeton in this first 4 situation. Trying to put my allegiances aside, but I do like Iowa State. I think that's a team that on this pod we've been rooting for. I think they started the season out underwhelmingly. And it's great that they have this opportunity to redeem themselves, especially in the first 4. How much do you think having to play a first 4 game and then also having to play the round of 64 will impact either Iowa State and Princeton?
I don't think it's a huge deal. There's no travel involved. Unlike in the men's tournament, the women's first 4 is at the same host site. So, they're going to be playing in South Bend for, Notre Dame is hosting that particular pod. So there's no travel. You play 2 games in 3 days. It's not the end of the world. And I think getting into a rhythm could eventually benefit one of these teams, especially because, Iowa State's got some depth. So I don't think it's going to be a huge issue there.
All right. Last but not least let's round it out.
All right, so we'll get to number 5. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, kudos to the committee for getting us the potential Louisville versus Haley Van Lith matchup. But what always happens in these cases is the matchup you want to see does not come to fruition because something gets in the way. And I think that something is going to be Nebraska against Louisville.
Okay.
This is a team that is just tough as freaking nails, and they shoot the ball so well. I mean, Alexis Markowski, just totally rock solid post. You've got shooters all around. Britt Prince has just been an awesome watch this year. And again, a team that never feels out of a game. So I like their size. I like their physicality. And I like their shooting. And I think that's going to be a hell of a game between Nebraska and Louisville. And if I had to pick one more upset, that's where I'm leaning.
The fun part about Nebraska is that they run their stuff. They're one of the most disciplined offensive teams. And when you think about Louisville's defense, it's going to be very interesting to see if they can disrupt that and make things a little bit uncomfortable out there. But yeah, every time I watch Nebraska, I'm like, oh, we know that play is coming. We know that they've been really trained really well in that regard. So, okay, this is a great list. And I think this is, I don't know, I want to ask you, when you're looking at last year's tournament versus this year's tournament, in terms of the amount of potential upsets, which one had more, in your opinion?
I really should have gone back and counted the number of upsets in 2024 before I could make an accurate comparison here. I feel like about 25% of the games in the first rounds end in upsets. So, maybe it's a little bit lower because of the hosting, but I do think, as much as we talk about parity within the top of this field, I think the bottom is a little bit weaker than it was last year. So I'm not expecting as many upsets early, though. Later on, if we get 6 versus 3 or 4 versus 1 or something, that seems to have more potential to me than these early round upsets.
I agree. I think there's a lot more parity in terms of the cream of the crop of the top echelon of all these teams. Oh, well, all I can say is It's going to be a very exciting couple of weeks. The build up to April 6th is going to be a lot of fun. And we got you covered right here at The Athletic at No Offseason. We'll be back tomorrow for our regular Tuesday pod. And it's going to be great because we're going to go even deeper into the bracket and have the possible paths to the Final Four laid out. And then again on Friday, we've got a very special guest. Legendary former Stanford coach Tara Vanderveer is going to be in the building. Her team did not make the tournament. However, she is very well experienced in this space. She'll be joining us to take all your most burning bracket questions. So make sure on that end, send us your questions. We need to know what you want to know so that we can help you. And also we can pose them to Coach Vanderveer, Coach Tara, as she likes to call herself. So leave a comment wherever you're listening. Give us a shout out on socials. We're on Instagram at TA No Offseason. It looks strange when you read it. It looks like an off season, but it's TA No Offseason. Or you can shout myself or any of the other hosts out. Our handles are in the show notes. Or you can also, oh my God, there's so many options. Like literally there's no excuse. Send us your questions. You can also email us at nooffseason@theathletic.com. We want to help you own your bracket pool. So write in and we'll do our best to answer everything on Friday. And speaking of owning your bracket pool, why not join ours? Sabreena, at what point do you usually do your bracket?
That's a great question. I think I usually fill one out tonight before I go to sleep, and then I just go back and redo it again before Friday. So
you see what I'm saying? Like the love and the passion is there, folks. We've done our nighttime routine, and brackets will be filled out tonight because I'll be working on mine as well. And now we encourage you guys to also fill out your bracket. The official No Offseason Bracket Challenge is live. Join us, our hosts, join our community, fill out your bracket, and compete for all the glory. I'm not sure what we'll give out, but there's the glory that you should want. Head on over. We're at the Yahoo Fantasy Hub to Women's Bracket Mayhem and search for our group, No Offseason Bracket Challenge. ID number, and this is important, 2519. No Offseason Bracket Challenge, ID number 2519. It's public. It's live. Come play with us. Check out the show notes for more info. And while you're there, make sure to visit our partner, Yahoo Sports Hub, sports.yahoo.com/women's-sports. Whew. Okay. Bracket is live. We know where everybody's seated. Sabrina's about to go do her bracket. I'm about to go do my bracket. So for now, we're going to close it out. Happy March Madness. Thanks for tuning in to No Offseason. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. No Offseason is hosted by Zena Cada with Chantel Jennings, Sabrina Merchant, and Ben Pickman. It's produced by Tanika Burrell. Our executive producers are Andrea B. Scott and Cassius Fleming. Our theme music is by Marcus Bagala. Grayson Moody is our video editor. Shannon Ryan is managing editor of women's basketball at The Athletic. Jesse Burton is our head of audio. And Tim McMaster is director of audio operations.